has announced a timetable for the gradual handover of security responsibility. Now time for PLO History of a Revolution.
In 1948, the State of Israel was proclaimed. Palestine was lost. 16 years later, in 1964, the Palestine Liberation Organization, or the PLO, was founded. Made up of different factions, the PLO has been at the heart of the struggle to regain Palestine ever since. Setting up an independent Palestinian organization was not easy. The first challenge the Palestinians faced was to wrest control of their own destiny from the Arab regimes. In early 1965, a series of attacks were carried out against Israeli civilians and infrastructure. A previously unknown Palestinian group calling itself AlJazeera, meaning the storm, seen here in training, claimed responsibility for the attacks. AlJazeera was started by a small group of Palestinian activists in the diaspora. They believed armed struggle was the only way to win back their lost homeland. The Arab regimes did not share this view. They feared being drawn into a conflict with Israel, for which they did not feel prepared. Palestine had been an area of conflict for many years. In 1947, Great Britain announced it was terminating its mandate over Palestine.
I repeat again that His Majesty's government have determined to base their policy on the assumption that they must lay down the mandate, under which they have sought for 25 years to discharge their obligations to fulfill the growth of the Jewish national home and to protect the interests of the Arab population. In order that there may be no misunderstanding of the attitude and policy of Britain, I have been instructed by His Majesty's government to announce with all solemnity that they have consequently decided that in the absence of a settlement, they must plan for an early withdrawal of British forces and of the British administration from Palestine.
Britain handed over Palestine to the United Nations. In 1947, the UN General Assembly decided to partition Palestine into two states, one Arab, the other Jewish. This partition plan was rejected by Palestinians and neighboring Arab states. In early 1948, open conflict erupted between Jews and Palestinians. In a confidential briefing at the time, America's Central Intelligence Agency predicted a defeat for the Jews.
As the Arabs gradually coordinate their war effort, the Jews will be forced to withdraw from isolated positions, and, having been drawn into a war of attrition, will gradually be defeated.
Following the withdrawal of the last British troops in May 1948, Jewish leaders proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. On the very next day, 5 Arab armies from Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq immediately declared war. One young Palestinian activist who was living in Cairo at the time was keen to join the fight.
أنا تركت تعليم كنت أدرس واجتمعنا إحنا الطلاب الفلسطينيين في الشبان المسلمين.
I left school. We gathered at the Young Muslims Association and we decided that whoever wanted to fight would have to burn their books. I was among those who burned their books and went and joined the army of holy struggle.
The Arab armies were defeated. The newly declared State of Israel seized control of most of Palestine, with the exception of Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. By 1949, close to 750,000 Palestinians had become refugees. In the late 1950s in Kuwait, amid the popular sentiment of Arab unity common in the region, a group of Palestinian exiles established a secret organization. They called it the Palestinian National Liberation Movement. It became known more popularly as Fatah. Yasser Arafat was one of the ringleaders of this new organization, which favored armed struggle to achieve the liberation of Palestine.
It was in Kuwait that we named it Fatah. Our Palestinian nationalistic activities.
Such activities were aimed at gaining autonomy from the Arab regimes, most dominant of which was the regime of Egyptian President Jamal Abdel Nasser. Advocating coordination with Nasser's regime.
We took a decision to form a Palestinian branch and coordinated this with President Nasser. It was agreed that our actions would conform with the overall Egyptian military strategy, that we wouldn't carry out military action that would prematurely draw Egypt into a war with Israel, for which it wasn't yet prepared.
Nasser convened the first Arab summit. His aim was to lead an Arab response to the continued existence and growing dominance of Israel. The Arab leaders voted to set up a body to organize the Palestinians in their diaspora. Ahmed al-Shuqairi, seen here on the right, a Palestinian diplomat from a well-known family, was chosen to head the newly formed body. From the outset, Shuqairi wanted an organization which would not just kowtow to Arab regimes.
The Arabs agreed to set up the PLO as a means of releasing the frustrations felt by the Palestinians. But in came Ahmed al-Shuqairi, who decided he was going to form a proper PLO. And he did. He must take the credit for setting up the PLO, its structure and national charter. He was a great man who should be recognized as such.
4 months later, in May of 1964, Shuqairi convened the first Palestinian parliament in Jerusalem. It was called the Palestine National Council. King Hussein of Jordan, the country which had administered the West Bank since 1950, attended the meeting. The parliament consisted of Palestinian elders as well as a younger generation who called for a more forceful approach to winning back their homeland. The parliament formally announced the establishment of the Palestine Liberation Organization and declared the State of Israel as illegal. To guarantee Jordanian acceptance of the meeting, Shuqairi allayed Jordanian fears by announcing that the PLO had no designs on the West Bank and was only interested in regaining territory from Israel. Shuqairi spent the next few years building support for the PLO. He set out to create a body that could truly be considered a voice for the stateless